Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now for today's case we're going to be discussing another Jane Doe case because the last time I did one of these you guys seemed to really enjoy it. I definitely find them really fascinating, just simply kind of grouping them all together. I just find it really fascinating how all of these people can go missing or lose their lives and no one have absolutely any idea who they are. I think it's heartbreaking, and I think the more that their kind of names and their faces are put out there, the kind of get steps closer to hopefully providing them with their identity. So for today's case we're going to be discussing the unsolved case of the Tempe Jane Doe, also known as the Tempe Girl. So if you want to hear a little bit about the details of the case, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. On April the 27th, 2002, the body of a young woman was discovered around 1869 East University Drive in Tempe, Arizona. She was found fully clothed and aged at being in her mid to late teens. The location in which the remains were found were also particularly close to the Arizona State University, and it was ultimately determined that she had died less than 24 hours before her remains were discovered. Very close to where the remains were found, investigators had come across a compact disc, and on the disc were a set of very clear fingerprints which, when tested, were determined to have belonged to a woman who was living in Phoenix, Arizona at that time. The detailed examination of the remains determined that when the girl had died, she had been aged between 15 and 19 years old. She was believed to have been from a Hispanic or Native American ancestry, and she had black hair and brown eyes. At the time of her death, she was wearing a red top, blue jeans, blue underwear, and one black wedged heeled shoe was found on her remains. This Jane Doe had a distinctive scar on the back of her left hand. It formed an L shape from the base of her pinky finger towards her wrist. Investigators had attempted to search through known databases in hopes of matching this victim with a missing persons report, especially since she was so young, but sadly they had no such luck. In terms of the cause of death itself, the investigators had at first assumed that it was a likely scenario that she had died as a result of foul play. But ultimately, the investigation of the remains determined that the official cause of death of the young girl had been cocaine intoxication. However, it could not ever be completely concluded as to whether or not the death had been a complete accident or whether it had been at the hands of another person. Past this point, investigators did everything they could in order to attempt to produce an accurate identification of the young girl. The woman whose fingerprints had been found on the disc that was located near the remains had been interviewed, and she denied having recognised or known the girl at all. But this woman's boyfriend recalled having been driving in the area in the night of April the 26th when he'd spotted the woman hitchhiking. He'd stopped to offer her a ride and she told him that she was trying to get to Tempe, hence the name of the Tempe Jane Doe. She'd told him that she started off her journey in Phoenix and she was heading there to buy some concert tickets from someone that had been selling them from there. One other thing he pointed out had been that she'd spoke mostly in Spanish during their ride together, and she told him that she'd been going through some quite severe family turmoil, so as they had recently discovered her bad habit of using recreational drugs. He had driven her to Tempe as she'd said she wanted to buy concert tickets there, but when they were nearing the location where she said she was allegedly going to pick up these concert tickets, she seemed as though she kind of changed her mind, and then she very openly asked him if he would buy some drugs for her, and he agreed. At some point past this, he'd also picked up another passenger which had been a known drug dealer in the area, and the money that she'd said she brought with her to pay for the concert tickets had then been used to buy herself some cocaine. So according to this woman's boyfriend, so the driver of the car, he'd witnessed her ingest the drug, but then she'd started to rapidly seem as though she wasn't in a good state, and the two men, so the driver and the known drug dealer, had realised that she was having a bad reaction to the drug. Rather than alert help or call the emergency services, the driver decided to drive them to the car park of the shopping mall near Arizona State University, and he removed her from the car. He'd then taken the other passenger to a nearby petrol station and told him to get out and ring emergency services. But he'd driven off before checking that this is what the man was doing. So he'd driven off without checking that anyone was actually doing anything to try and help the young girl. and then the remains of the young girl were found in the early hours of the following morning. Despite the fact that he'd driven off without attempting to get her any help, this driver was never actually prosecuted on any charges. This was due to the fact that there were so many questions left unanswered, including who she was, how old she was, whether she'd been alive when he'd removed her from the car, and whether he'd used any force to remove her. There's so many other questions, so there was nothing really solid that they could prosecute him on. And this man's story did appear to ultimately check out, and on the plus side, it did provide investigators with some more details of the victim to kind of hopefully aid them in the search for their identity. They'd searched not only through all of the missing persons report matching the young girl's description, but they'd also begun to contact schools in Arizona in hopes of an identity coming forward of a missing student. However, sadly, despite all of their active attempts, no positive identification for the Tempe Jane Doe was ever found. Over the years, multiple missing persons' identities have been suggested as potential matches for the young girl, but they've all been disproven through DNA testing. And sadly, that is all the information I have today to discuss on the Tempe Jane Doe. So like I said, it's technically unsolved in terms of the identity being unsolved, so no one really knows who this young victim was, sadly. But if this man's story was in fact true and accurate, then investigators obviously do kind of know what had happened to the young girl, and it just seems like a very unfortunate accident. So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, as well as if you have any other case requests, please feel free to leave them in the description. I hope you're all doing good. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys very, very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.